This could be the end, really and truly the end of NPR and PBS. There's a big investigation that was just announced by none other than Brendan Carr, the new chairman of the FCC, who actually sees the FCC as having some responsibility. How refreshing. So he just fired this one off to none other than Paula Kerger and Catherine Marr. They would be the heads, the presidents of PBS and NPR. And, people have been kind of complaining about these guys for a while because you see the bias, right? The constant bias. Here's a PBS journalist I'm going to show you who's whining on and on and on about, Mexico can't handle it. We can't just send millions of people back to Mexico. That's not going to work. That's going to be so bad for Mexico. Forget about the fact that it is bad for us. And you do work for the public broadcasting system of America.
Mexico cannot cope, not sure any country can, but Mexico can't cope with like a sudden influx of millions of people. I mean, as much as she wants to embrace them, to use her word, when they come back and make them feel welcome, it all sounds very nice when you're listening to it, but the reality of that is just completely unsustainable. A lot of these people have lived in the U.S. for decades. They have lives there. They have families. They're good standing citizens. So they're not in a position to just be deported and say like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to come back here and take a job making a fraction of what I used to make and go to my town where I don't have anything left, which is maybe it's been overrun by violence. I mean, it's unrealistic to think that wouldn't lead to a crisis.
I think it's a little unrealistic to think that it's not going to create a crisis here in the United States of America when you have so many people here illegally that are draining this system, that are not paying taxes in the system, that are costing us. Okay, like we shouldn't have to absorb that. But, the journalists over at PBS, they feel kind of differently, and this is why it has recently become an issue. Apparently, they get 1% of their funding directly from the government, 8% of their funding indirectly from the government, which, frankly, is 8% and 1% just too darn much. They shouldn't be getting so much as a nickel from the government if they are this agenda-oriented. And they are. Representative Duncan of South Carolina, forgive me, brought this up just a few months ago on Capitol Hill.
Shouldn't be funding a propaganda machine, which is what NPR has evolved into. The Constitution lays out 17 enumerated powers for this government. Providing state media isn't one of them. NPR and PBS have become American Pravda, a reliable mouthpiece for the liberal bureaucracy and their left-wing enablers. It's time to restore some sanity to this government by eliminating NPR's federal boondoggle.
Well, that would be refreshing. Why don't we just say, taxpayers, you don't have to contribute. If you actually love NPR, you're welcome to contribute on their own. In fact, they would say the majority of our funding is actually coming from individual contributions. Well, they do get a lot you see from organizations like, George Soros's, and then there's a few others. I guess we get the Carnegie Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates. We can get into those numbers, but keep in mind, this is the crux of the issue as far as Brendan Carr is concerned. He's saying, you know what? You guys are not supposed to be advertising. You're not supposed to have commercials on NPR, but it kind of seems like you do have commercials on NPR because of the story selection. You're effectively embedding the commercials within the programming, something that's actually not legally something you can do. So an investigation in this case is actually quite pertinent. So while it may only be 1% direct contribution from taxpayers, and another 8% indirect contributions from the federal government, there is 38% of a contribution that's coming from corporations and nonprofits, places like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Open Society from George Soros, and a series of others. So if you're spouting a narrative on your air that is constantly going back to the values of the organizations that are supporting you, then isn't that effectively a commercial? I think Brendan Carr's got himself a suit. Okay, so this is what he's writing. He put this letter out. He said, basically, you are in violation of something called Section 39B of the Communications Act, which prohibits a channel like this from airing these commercials or any kind of other promotional announcements on behalf of for-profit entities. So you've got the for-profit entities that are working, I guess, in conjunction with some of the other entities, and I'd actually take this a step further. I don't care if they're for-profit or they're not for-profit. If you've got Melinda and Bill Gates and their foundation pushing a certain agenda, and maybe they get money from the likes of some of the big pharma folks, and there's, this money-raising boondoggle that's going on, and it's getting funneled back to NPR and PBS, you got yourself a problem, don't you think? So he's going to investigate it. He's going to investigate it. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Can we say sayonara to NPR and PBS? I think it's about time. Because we don't need state-run media. You want to compete? Go compete with everybody else, guys. Go compete with everybody else and own up to what you are. I mean, I listen to these guys. I look at their websites and I'm like, for goodness sakes, they're as bad, if not worse, than MSNBC. And they're masquerading as though they're somehow the perfection of truth. NPR is in a lot of trouble. I mean, take a look at these numbers here. So Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation donated $4 million to support NPR's coverage of global health and development issues. Gee. And then you see George Soros over here with a $1.8 million grant. That's all the way back in 2010 to the Open Society Institute. They had a whole project, which has now become a problem, called The Impact of Government. And they were trying to bring in at least 100 journalists who were going to talk about this impact of government issue. And then you got Carnegie Corporation with their millions, and Rockefeller Foundation with $500,000, and MacArthur Foundation, all very left-leaning nonprofits, foundations that are influencing the programming you see of one NPR or PBS. And this is the problem. They are in total violation of the law in that case. And so Brendan Carr and the FCC, they got a case. In other words, these state-affiliated entities that are getting all this money from private corporations are doing the bidding of the private corporations and therefore are having commercials. I mean, they may not be the 30-second jobbies that you see from the pharmaceutical companies on the evening news every night, but they are, which are just horrendous, right? But they're commercials in their own way. And keep in mind, this is effectively propaganda, and it's sanctioned propaganda. It's sanctioned, by the way, by the people that are running the organization because, maybe this is what their entities, their for-profit entities, and their foundations want them to do? I ask because you see, there's this woman who runs NPR. Her name is Catherine Marr, and she's sort of this like pseudo-intellectual wannabe type that likes to talk about truth in a very philosophical way. So here she is in a TED Talk. Mind you, this is the head of NPR, okay? The head of National Public Radio, who goes and does a TED Talk where she effectively admits propaganda is fine. Because the search for truth means that you may have to do a little propaganda along the way. She doesn't really make a ton of sense. She acts like she's the first one to ever have this sort of philosophical revelation. She's kind of tough to take, guys. This is like the epitome of the liberal nonsense. But her conclusion, if you listen to this, is like propaganda's fine, right? Like as long as it serves a higher purpose, why are we going to get bogged down and looking for the truth?
But one of the most significant differences, critical for moving from polarization to productivity, is that the Wikipedians who write these articles aren't actually focused on finding the truth. They're working for something that's a little bit more attainable, which is the best of what we can know right now. And after 7 years there, I actually believe that they're onto something. That for our most tricky disagreements, seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of the truth isn't necessarily the best place to start. In fact, I think our reverence for the truth might have become a bit of a distraction that is preventing us from finding consensus and getting important things done. Now, none of that's to say that the truth isn't important. The truth obviously exists. It's at the core, or the search for
I just got to jump in. Can we hear that again?
important things done. Might have become a bit of a distraction.
Okay,
That is preventing us
she just
from
told
finding
us
consensus and getting important things.
the head of NPR just told us that finding the truth might actually be a distraction from getting important things done. I mean, that seems a little too far off the left's curve, frankly. I mean, for you to be running National Public Radio. Miss Catherine, who hails from Fairfield County, Connecticut, the Tony Fairfield County, Connecticut, did a degree in Middle Eastern Studies at NYU, then went over to the American University in Cairo to continue her Middle Eastern studies. Let me just tell you, I think I know where her sympathies lie, and they're not with the United States of America, and certainly not with Donald Trump.
Now, none of that's to say that the truth isn't important. The truth obviously exists. It's at the core, or the search for the truth is at the core of some of our greatest human achievements. It can animate and inspire us to do, learn, and create great things. But I think in our messy human hearts, we also know that the truth is something of a fickle mistress, and that the beauty of the truth is actually often in the struggle. It's the reason that we have so many sublime chronicles of the human experience, because there are so many different truths to be explored. And so in this spirit, I know that the truth exists for each of you in this room. It also probably exists for the person sitting next to you. But the thing is, the two of you don't necessarily have the same truths. And this is because for many of us, truth is what we make when we merge facts about the world with our beliefs about the world. Each of us has our own truth, and it's probably a good one. It's based
But apparently it's just fine that the Wikipedians spend all their time trying to recreate the truth rather than actually own up to what's what. Yours truly? I mean, my Wikipedia page is a complete total mess. They've taken away every award I've ever gotten. They've doubted that I went to the high school I went to. I mean, it's just actually a mess. You go over to some liberal person's, like hers, I guarantee you, it looks like, whew, like she is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Okay? So we have a little bit of a problem. I mean, it's actually just gross, and it's coming to light now in a really important way. So Catherine Marr, the head of NPR, is now under investigation. Her entire organization is under investigation because they don't seem to feel compelled in any way to actually write or tell the truth. They think it's actually really important that they promote some ethereal thing that's kind of just better for society rather than actual truth. Aren't you glad that Donald Trump is president? I'm just going to say, aren't you glad? CBS News is going to settle with him. By the way, we get that story coming up. But first, just a reminder, 76 Research, where you will always get the truth about investing from me and my colleague, my co-founder over there, Rob Horton. Go check it out today, 76research.com. Use code word dollar, 76research.com. You can get the 76 report with code word dollar. It's just $1 a month for the first 2 months. And then after that, it goes to $9.95. But I'm telling you, we are nothing but transparent. We are nothing but the truth over there, because when it comes to investing, you don't have time to mess around with this nonsense.